1. You did not arrive here by accident. You are the chosen. This is not another piece of content. This is not background noise for your scrolling mind. This is an encounter, a divine one, and you didn't land here by chance. The world may tell you that things happen randomly, that coincidences rule our lives, but the truth, the deeper truth, the one that echoes beyond time, is that nothing truly sacred is ever random, especially this moment, especially you. If these words have found their way into your life, if they've crossed the threshold of your day, it's because something greater has orchestrated it. You didn't search for this message. This message searched for you, and it found you at the exact moment it was meant to. Let your spirit slow down now. Let the noise fall behind you, because what you're about to hear isn't just a message, it's a mirror. It's a whisper from heaven, echoing into your chaos, your confusion, your loneliness, reminding you, you are chosen. But before you can step into that truth, you need to know something deeper. You need to know this. You have always felt different because you are. There's been something inside you that didn't match the world around you. You've walked into rooms and felt out of place, not because you were inadequate, but because your spirit was tuned to a different frequency. You've tried to be normal. You've tried to fit in. But no matter how hard you tried, something in you always resisted. That's not rebellion, that's revelation. You weren't made to blend in. You were designed to stand out, not with ego, but with purpose. And perhaps life hasn't been easy for you. Perhaps you've been through pain that others never saw. Nights that broke you, moments that silenced you, betrayals that nearly buried you. But what if I told you none of that was punishment? What if I told you all of it was preparation? You see, God doesn't choose the comfortable. He chooses the contradiction. He chooses the broken, the wounded, the overlooked, and turns them into his warriors. You were not chosen for comfort. You were chosen for calling, and I know, maybe right now you feel like your life is standing still. Maybe you've been silent for so long you've forgotten how to speak your truth. Maybe you've been told you're too intense, too emotional, too sensitive. But can I tell you something the world refuses to admit? You were never too much. You were simply too divine for their dysfunction. They couldn't handle your light, so they called you crazy. They couldn't understand your vision, so they called you foolish. But God never forgot you. He's been waiting. And now is the moment he sends this message to wake up the fire inside of you. Pause. Breathe. This is your sign. This is your confirmation. This is your divine interruption. You are not watching this by accident. And maybe, just maybe, God didn't bring you here so that you could be inspired. Maybe he brought you here so that you could be activated, because something in you is shifting. Something in you is awakening. You're no longer satisfied with survival. You want alignment, purpose, peace. You're tired of pretending you're okay when your soul is screaming for meaning. And here it is. This is it. You have been seen. You have been heard. Heaven has been watching, not to judge you, but to preserve you. Not to expose your weakness, but to protect your anointing. Every time you were rejected, it wasn't because you weren't good enough. It was because you were too sacred to be handled carelessly. Every person who walked away, a divine subtraction. Every opportunity that slipped away, a redirection. Because the truth is, you weren't being abandoned, you were being positioned. So now I want you to hear me, not with your ears, but with your soul. You are here, and you are meant to hear this. Don't scroll, don't dismiss it. Don't pretend this doesn't apply to you, because the Holy Spirit led you here for a reason. This is not just another video. This is your turning point. This is your confirmation that everything you've endured had a purpose. And before we go any further, I need to speak directly into your heart. You did not come here by accident. You were sent here, or perhaps I was sent to you, because God has placed a signal in my spirit to say these words to you. And I believe either He sent me to speak to you, or He sent you to find this message. But either way, we are both here, and He is watching. So listen closely. You've spent long enough shrinking yourself, long enough questioning your worth, long enough believing the lie that you are ordinary. It ends today. This is the chapter where you stop asking, "Why me?" and you start declaring, "Of course me," because you were not born to be average. You were born to be anointed. And now the heavens are waiting for your response. Are you ready? 2, they thought you were a joke, but you were the storm they never saw coming. They laughed at you. Maybe not always out loud, but in the silence behind your back. They rolled their eyes at your dreams, questioned your motives, mocked the intensity in your voice and the weight behind your words. They thought you were dramatic. They labeled you too sensitive, too deep, too intense. In truth, they simply couldn't understand a soul that was carrying something heaven ordained. But what they didn't know, what they never saw coming, was that the very thing they called foolish was the fire God had been stoking in secret. You weren't meant to impress them. You weren't born to be understood by them. You were designed to be sent straight through them like a storm. Quiet, holy, uncontainable. For a long time you let them define you. You watered yourself down to make them comfortable. You stayed small so they wouldn't feel intimidated by the bigness of your vision. You laughed at your own convictions so they wouldn't label you strange. And for what? Their acceptance, their temporary praise. But all it did was leave you feeling hollow. Because deep inside, you always knew you were carrying something weightier than the world could explain and heavier than your heart was prepared to handle. Still, you kept walking with it. You carried that weight through the ridicule, through the gossip, through the betrayals, through the seasons where no one clapped for you. And while they were busy watching your surface, God was working in your spirit. Every misunderstanding became an altar. Every wound became a molding tool. While they were waiting for you to fail, heaven was building your foundation. They couldn't see it. How could they? Your growth didn't look loud. It didn't sparkle. It didn't show up in highlight reels. Your growth was silent, the kind that forms in the dark when no one is watching, when your tears are your only witness and God is your only audience. That's where the storm formed, not in the spotlight, but in the silence. You were not failing, you were forging, and now they're confused because you didn't respond the way they expected. You didn't collapse. You didn't beg for their validation. You didn't try to prove your worth. You just kept walking. You stayed silent. You grew in the shadows. And now you've emerged, not as the version of yourself they remember, but as the version they never thought you'd survive long enough to become. You no longer carry the need to be liked. That was a prison they trained you to live inside. But you've been set free. You've been redefined, not by their words, but by your resilience. And now that you're rising, their silence is louder than their laughter ever was. They don't mock anymore. They whisper, because deep down, they see it. You've changed, not just externally. You've become someone they can no longer access. The very presence they once dismissed now unnerves them. Your peace unsettles their chaos. Your glow is no longer dimmed by their disbelief. And your silence, it's louder than their applause ever could have been. But don't get distracted by their regret. Don't turn back to explain yourself to those who refuse to hear you the first time. You don't owe them your testimony. Your existence is proof enough. Your presence in this moment, after all the times you should have broken, is the loudest sermon you'll ever preach. So let them sit in their confusion. Let them wonder how you made it. Let them wrestle with the truth they tried to bury. Because here's what they don't realize. The version of you they mocked was just the seed. But the storm is the harvest. And it's not just coming, it's already here. You were never the weak one. You were the weapon. And the moment you stopped trying to be accepted was the moment you became unstoppable. 3. The ones who are chosen always get pushed into the shadows before they rise in glory. Before the crown ever rests on the head, there is a season of silence. Before the breakthrough, there is always isolation. It doesn't feel like a gift. It doesn't feel sacred. It feels like abandonment, like rejection, like being forgotten while the rest of the world moves forward without you. But the truth is, if you've been overlooked, hidden, pushed out of rooms where you once felt at home, it's not because you were unworthy. It's because your presence was too sacred for spaces not built to hold your anointing. God never discards what he plans to use. He simply withdraws it from circulation to protect it during transformation. You weren't being erased. You were being set apart. You weren't being ignored. You were being kept. The shadows didn't come to smother you. They came to shape you. They came to remove the noise, the distractions, the illusions that told you your worth was tied to attention, to productivity, to applause. They came to peel back everything that was not essential, to make room for what was eternal. The silence you hated was the womb of your next dimension. And the pain you felt wasn't proof of failure, it was proof of formation. Every chosen one is led into the dark before they're released into the light. Not to be punished, not to be broken, but to be rebuilt without interference. That's why the people around you couldn't stay. That's why the doors closed. That's why the things that used to make sense suddenly fell apart. Because the next version of you couldn't be built in public. It required a quiet place, a secret place, a place where no one's hands could touch what God was refining. You wanted clarity, but heaven gave you obscurity. You prayed for direction, and all you heard was silence. But that silence was never empty. It was full of strategy, full of blueprints, full of assignments that only those who endure the darkness can carry. It's tempting to believe that if you were truly called, everything would have gone smoothly. That if God's hand was on your life, the path would be easy, the people loyal, the progress visible. But the calling is never convenient. It doesn't come wrapped in comfort. It comes wrapped in contradiction. One day you're celebrated, the next you're silenced. One moment you're seen, the next you're hidden. But that doesn't mean you've lost your value. That means your value is being protected. God hides what he intends to reveal with power. He withdraws what he's about to release with purpose. Just like gold is placed in fire, just like swords are hammered in silence, so too are chosen ones shaped far away from the crowd's noise. You didn't lose your place. You were pulled out so you wouldn't be poisoned by environments not equipped to support your evolution. The room wasn't too small for your ego, it was too small for your calling. And now, that calling is awakening. You've felt the shift. You've noticed the fire stirring again, the clarity returning, and now you know you didn't come out of that isolation the same. You're quieter but sharper. You're softer but stronger. You smile less, but you see more. Your discernment is different. Your presence is heavier, not in a way that burdens others, but in a way that commands reverence. And it all started in the shadows. What they thought was your burial was actually your planting. What they thought was your defeat was actually your development. And now, what's rising in you can't be stopped. So don't resent the darkness. Don't curse the silence. It was the ground that guarded your roots while heaven watered your destiny. And now, you don't just walk into rooms, you shift them. You don't chase attention, you carry alignment. Because you are no longer just surviving the shadows. You are carrying the evidence of someone who was chosen there. For the silent ones are the most dangerous. God uses stillness to shape the unshakable. You weren't being quiet because you were broken. You were quiet because you were being built. There's a difference. The world taught you that power looks loud, that impact requires noise, validation, movement. But heaven works in stillness. God doesn't develop warriors on stages. He forges them in solitude, in the moments no one claps for you, in the hours when your phone doesn't ring, in the days when your value feels invisible to everyone but him. You learned how to sit in silence, not as a form of defeat, but as discipline. And it was there, in that lonely place, in that sacred tension between who you were and who you're becoming, that something terrifyingly beautiful happened. You stopped seeking approval. You stopped trying to be understood. You stopped explaining your process to people committed to misunderstanding your assignment. And when you did, your power multiplied. Not because you shouted louder, but because you stopped speaking where your words were never meant to be consumed. That's the secret. The most powerful people don't always talk the most. They observe, they withdraw, they process deeply, feel intensely, and act deliberately. Their silence isn't absence, it's calculation. Their restraint isn't weakness, it's authority. And if you're one of them, if you've ever felt like your silence has been mistaken for passivity, let this be your confirmation. Your quiet is louder than their noise. They don't know what to do with someone like you. Someone who doesn't flinch under pressure. Someone who doesn't fight for attention, but somehow commands it anyway. Someone who doesn't scream to be heard. Because their presence speaks in frequencies most people aren't equipped to interpret. And that's what unsettles them. Your restraint confuses them. Your peace offends them. Because they've spent their lives surviving off performance. And now they're standing in front of someone who performs nothing, but carries everything. You don't need to announce your return. You don't need to prove what you've been working on. Those who are meant to sense it already do. And those who never took the time to understand, you never deserved access to this version of you anyway. You see, the fire didn't make you louder, it made you precise. The pain didn't make you bitter, it made you watchful. And now you walk with a level of discernment that cannot be taught, only earned. You speak less now because you don't waste wisdom. You move differently because you understand timing. You don't react to noise. You respond to strategy. You stopped dancing for acceptance because you finally understood. You are the room. And maybe they'll never say it out loud, but they feel it. Every time you enter, every time you choose silence over spectacle, Every time you withhold your energy like royalty, choosing when and where to show favor, you've stopped leaking your light. You've stopped handing out explanations like apologies. You no longer feel the need to explain why your energy shifted, because now you understand that God is the one who initiated the shift. The stillness they mocked has become your superpower. The solitude they called loneliness has become your fortress. And the silence you once resented has become the echo of divine alignment. You are no longer just waiting for your moment, you are the moment. 5. Forgiveness was never about them. It was always about your freedom. They don't deserve it. Let's be honest. The ones who betrayed you, lied about you, used your kindness like a doormat. They never once showed real remorse. They never looked back. They never apologized in the way your pain deserved. And for the longest time, you thought that made forgiveness impossible, because in your mind, to forgive them was to let them off the hook, to pretend it never happened, to erase the impact of what they did. But what if forgiveness was never meant to be a gift to them? What if forgiveness was always about freeing you? You've carried that weight for so long, the bitterness, the anger, the unspoken questions that circle in your chest like ghosts. Why did they hurt me like that? Why did they walk away? Why did they choose silence instead of truth? These questions never brought closure. They only reopened the wound. Because closure was never going to come from them. They don't hold it. You do. Forgiveness doesn't mean you forget. It doesn't mean you tolerate. It doesn't mean you welcome them back in with open arms and no boundaries. It means you release the poison they poured into your spirit, so it doesn't grow roots and choke the rest of your garden. It means you cut the soul tie that keeps you energetically tethered to a past you've already outgrown. It means you let go of the hope that they'll ever understand what they did. And instead, you choose peace over being right. This isn't about being soft. This is about being so strong that you refuse to let your enemies live rent-free in your mind any longer. The rage you feel, it's valid. The memories, they're real, but you don't have to hold on to them like they're identity markers. You're more than what they did to you. You're more than the version of yourself who cried through those nights, replaying scenes you never got closure for. That version of you was a chapter, not your whole story. So how do you forgive someone who never even said sorry? You write their name on a piece of paper. You pray. You cry. You speak every word you were never allowed to say. And then you burn it. You tear it. You release it to the wind, not because they earned peace, but because you did. Because you are too powerful, too sacred, too aligned to carry shackles made of old conversations and broken promises. Because your future is calling and it cannot wait for you to drag the weight of betrayal any longer. Forgiveness doesn't make them innocent. It makes you free. It doesn't say what they did was okay. It says, what they did will no longer control the way I breathe. Because let's be real, they're not losing sleep. They're not waking up with heaviness in their chest. You are. And every time you replay that scene, you re-give them access to your nervous system. That ends today. You don't forgive because they deserve a second chance. You forgive because you deserve your first real breath of peace. You forgive because you love yourself enough to close the chapter. You forgive because you're done being stuck in a spiritual waiting room, hoping for justice that may never come from them, but will always come from God. So write the name, light the flame, say the prayer, cut the tie, not for them. 6. The ones who tried to break you are now sitting in a prison you'll never see, the spiritual kind. It's not the kind of prison made of metal bars. It doesn't come with chains or a sentence written in ink. It's invisible to the eye, but unmistakable to the soul. They walk around smiling, pretending, posting, laughing in crowds. But deep down, they're locked in something they cannot escape. That's what happens when you try to destroy someone who was protected from the beginning. You might not see their punishment, but that doesn't mean it isn't happening. It's happening every single day, in silence, in repetition, in a torment they can't explain to anyone without revealing the truth about what they did to you. They wanted to see you crumble. They wanted to watch your light go dim. They may have never said it out loud, but you felt it. In their subtle shifts, in their withdrawal, in the way they clapped quietly when you failed and went silent when you succeeded. They used your vulnerability against you. They preyed on your insecurity, not for you, but against you. And then they walked away, certain you'd never recover, certain you'd fade quietly while they moved forward in peace. But the thing is, you didn't fade. You rose. Quietly, painfully, deliberately. And your rise, it haunts them, because they expected your pain to be your end, and now it's their mirror. Every time they see your name, something inside them twists. Not because you're gloating, not because you ever sought revenge, but because your peace exposes their guilt. Your healing shines a spotlight on their cruelty. They never thought they'd have to see you whole, because they assumed they broke you for good. That's where the prison begins. They scroll through your life now, wondering how you're still standing, how you still smile, how you still found purpose after everything they tried to sabotage. And that confusion, that discomfort, that low-key obsession with your glow-up, it's not admiration, it's regret. And not the kind that brings people to repent. The kind that eats them from the inside out, while they pretend they don't remember what they did. God doesn't always strike people with lightning. Sometimes He lets them live long enough to feel everything they caused. Sometimes justice looks like silence that echoes louder than any courtroom. Sometimes the punishment is private, but permanent. They lose peace. They lose alignment. They lose the ability to enjoy what they once celebrated because your name is etched into their failure like a watermark on their soul. That's what happens when you become the living proof of what they never thought you'd survive. But don't confuse this with revenge. That's not what this is. This isn't you wishing for their downfall. This is heaven's way of restoring the balance. It's God's way of saying, I saw what they did in the dark, and while you were crying, I was building your comeback. While they were laughing, I was writing the next chapter where you win quietly and permanently. So don't look back. Don't check in to see if they've learned their lesson. You don't need to see the justice to believe it's real. You just need to keep walking. Because the prison they're in, guilt, shame, divine consequence, is not yours to tour. It's yours to outgrow. And the most powerful thing you can do now, thrive without the need to be seen. Heal without needing them to notice. Rise like their opinions never mattered in the first place, because they don't anymore. You're free now. Don't chain yourself back to a story you've already outlived just to confirm what God has already revealed. Their judgment is happening. You just don't need to be there for it, because the chosen never get even. We outgrow. 7. You are the glitch in the system, the fragment this world can't control. You've always felt out of place, like something inside you didn't quite sync with the rhythms of the world around you. While others seem to move smoothly through routines, expectations, and surface-level conversations, you were always the one asking deeper questions. You felt too much, saw too much, thought too deeply, and for the longest time you tried to suppress it. You tried to normalize yourself, to silence your instincts, to dull your discernment, to blend in. But every time you did, something in your soul started to ache. You weren't meant to be part of the system. You were designed to interrupt it. They couldn't place you. People could never figure you out. You weren't predictable. You didn't follow trends. You didn't fake emotions or shrink yourself for comfort. And so you became a problem to those who only understood people they could control. A threat to those who relied on the obedience of others to feel powerful. They didn't understand you, so they tried to fix you, dismiss you, or manipulate you into a more manageable shape. But none of it worked, because you were never created to fit inside their boxes. You were heaven-coded, and anything not built on truth cannot contain someone born of divine disruption. You are a spiritual anomaly. You were born with a knowing, not taught, not learned, but remembered. And that knowing made you dangerous, because the world runs on illusion, polished images, false confidence, approval addiction. But you carried truth in your bones. You didn't settle for shallow. You didn't fear silence. You listened deeper than people were comfortable with. You noticed patterns others ignored. And every time someone lied, your spirit winced, not because you hated them, but because you couldn't unknow what you saw. That's why they called you intense. That's why they said you were too serious. That's why they were always slightly uncomfortable in your presence. Not because you did anything wrong, but because your authenticity made their performance impossible. You showed up without a mask, and that exposed how much of theirs they were still wearing. And here's what most people never realized. You were never trying to be better than anyone. You just refused to be less than you were created to be. You walked differently because you were aligned with something ancient, something the world forgot. That's why you were rejected by shallow groups. That's why you were passed over for opportunities tied to performance. That's why people who once celebrated you suddenly grew distant, not because you lost your light, but because it grew too bright for their comfort zone. You are the glitch, the reminder, the sacred error in a flawed system. You show up, and reality shifts, not because you demand it, but because your very frequency bends the environment. Conversations slow down, eyes lock. People start confessing things to you they never meant to say. Strangers open up, old patterns collapse. You didn't ask for that. You didn't chase it. It's just what happens when someone is walking in truth while surrounded by people performing for applause. The system hates what it can't control, and you, chosen one, are uncontrollable. Not because you're wild, but because you're rooted. You don't need attention to feel whole. You don't need claps to stay on mission. You're guided by something unseen, and that terrifies those who live only for the visible. But don't dim, don't apologize. Don't start editing yourself just because your power makes others uncomfortable. You didn't break the system, you revealed it. You showed where the cracks were. You exposed the lie beneath the smile. You called out the imbalance by simply being yourself. And that is your gift. So no, you're not too much. You're just too real for a world that thrives on pretending. And that's why you're here, to disturb what's fake, to reset what's broken, to wake up what's been spiritually asleep for too long. You are not an error. You are the code. You are not the disruption. You are the divine interruption. 8. They don't hate you. They fear what your light awakens in them. You've been asking the wrong question. It's not, why don't they like me? It's, why does my presence make them uneasy when I've done nothing wrong? You've walked into rooms and felt the shift. You've felt the stares, the fake smiles, the conversations that stop mid-sentence the moment you step in. You've felt the weight of being misunderstood, judged, and subtly pushed aside. And for a long time you internalized it. You thought maybe it was your fault. Maybe you were too intense, too quiet, too sensitive, too different. But let's set the record straight now. They don't dislike you. They fear you. Not because you did anything wrong, but because your presence threatens the lies they've built their lives around. Your light forces them to see, and not everyone is ready to see. You walk in truth, and that alone makes you disruptive. You carry clarity, and that makes people who live in confusion feel exposed. You speak with conviction, and that makes people who survive on performance feel seen in the worst way. Your calm doesn't soothe them, it unsettles them, because they've never found peace without pretending. Your silence speaks, your presence pierces, and none of it is accidental. You weren't made to entertain the crowd. You were sent to shake the spirit of whoever was still pretending. You carry a mirror, not by force, but by essence. When you show up, masks start slipping, performances start cracking, and the people who spent their whole lives building safe identities built on illusion, they can't hold their posture in front of someone who doesn't need to perform. You've become a reminder, a walking contradiction to everything they've settled for. You remind them of the boldness they buried, the dreams they gave up on, the truth they ignored to stay accepted. You are what they could have become if they had chosen courage over comfort. And that's why they avoid you. That's why they gossip. That's why they try to minimize your presence without ever directly confronting you. Because it's not you they're rejecting. It's the part of themselves they lost a long time ago. You didn't do anything. You just kept becoming. You kept evolving. You kept growing. And they didn't. They stayed behind, hoping the version of you that once needed their approval would come back. But that version is gone now, transformed in silence, strengthened by betrayal, and anointed by fire. You no longer shrink to be digestible. You no longer tiptoe to make others feel comfortable. You're not loud, but you're undeniable. And for those still addicted to comfort, your presence is unbearable. But don't change. Don't dim your truth to be invited into their false peace. Don't edit your identity to earn love that was always conditional. Don't ever apologize for the shift you caused simply by existing in alignment. They may label it arrogance, coldness, distance, but that's just their fear trying to make sense of something their ego can't explain. And the truth is, they will never tell you this, but you inspire them in secret. They watch you from a distance. They study you in silence. They admire what they don't yet understand. And when they finally begin their journey toward truth, they'll remember you as the one who disturbed their sleep. So let them be uncomfortable. Let your glow sting their eyes. Let your peace be too loud for their chaos. Because you were never meant to soothe their illusions. You were sent to awaken what's been sleeping in them for years. You don't need to be liked. You were born to be felt. 9. Everything you lost was a sacred clearing. Heaven was making room. You thought it was falling apart. The friendships, the opportunities, the routines that once made sense. You watched familiar people grow distant. You experienced silence where there used to be conversation. Doors closed without warning. And it hurt, deeply. You grieved, even if you didn't admit it. You tried to make sense of it. You prayed for clarity. But for a long time, all you got was more loss, more silence, more emptiness. And now you're here, wondering what happened, wondering why so many things had to be stripped away just when you were finally trying to step into something better. But let me say what maybe no one said to you yet. It wasn't falling apart, it was being cleared. Heaven doesn't do demolition without reconstruction. And when God starts removing things from your life, it's not because you're cursed. It's because the room you were living in was too crowded to carry what He's about to place in your hands. You wanted growth. You wanted purpose. You wanted elevation. But you didn't realize how many things were attached to the old version of you. The version that tolerated disrespect, that settled for half love, that stayed in cycles out of fear, that stayed small to keep others comfortable. That version of you was surrounded by people and patterns that were only familiar, not faithful. So heaven stepped in, quietly, without your permission, without your understanding, and started removing, not to punish you, but to protect you from attachments that would poison your next chapter. You see, the most dangerous things in your life weren't always loud and obvious. Sometimes they came disguised as almost right, almost loyal, almost supportive, almost aligned. But almost is not enough for someone who's been chosen to carry something sacred. God's promises don't live in places built on compromise. And if He let you keep all of it, the false friends, the draining connections, the cycles that numbed your soul, they would have diluted the calling on your life. So yes, it was painful. Yes, it felt like rejection. Yes, you begged for some of it to stay, but heaven heard the parts of your prayers that you didn't know how to say. You asked for clarity, and God gave you separation. You asked for alignment, and God gave you subtraction. You asked for destiny, and God removed everything that couldn't go with you. What you saw as loss was actually strategy. What you thought was a delay was divine preservation. And now, standing on the other side of it, you're beginning to see you didn't lose, you were lightened, you were untangled, you were set free. Because how can you fly while dragging anchors? The pain had purpose. Every no was a redirection, every ending was a cleansing, and every time something left, space opened. Space for clarity, peace, true connection, divine timing. You're not empty, you're ready. So stop mourning what heaven celebrated. Stop rehearsing scenes that were already written out of your script. Stop trying to resurrect connections God already buried. You're not that person anymore. That version of you has been released, and in its place, someone stronger, clearer, and more aligned has emerged. Don't fill the space just because you're uncomfortable with stillness. Wait for what's real. Wait for what matches your evolution. Wait for the people who recognize your light without needing you to dim it. Everything you lost was never meant to stay. It was a sacred clearing, and now there's finally room for everything you've prayed for to arrive. 10. The final message from heaven. You're no longer allowed to doubt who you are. You've come too far to go back. You've carried too much to still wonder if you're worthy. You've endured fire, betrayal, silence, and storms, and yet here you are, still breathing, still standing, still rising. There is nothing random about that. There is nothing accidental about you. But here's the truth. It's time to stop doubting. You've questioned yourself long enough. You've spent too many nights replaying conversations, shrinking in rooms where your soul was too large to fit, biting your tongue around people who couldn't handle your truth. You've dimmed your voice, delayed your dreams, and watered down your wisdom, all in the name of being easier to love, less intimidating, more relatable. But heaven never asked you to be manageable. Heaven made you powerful. The world told you to be soft, but God called you strong. The world told you to be quiet, but your calling speaks too loudly to be silenced. And now, every time you start doubting yourself, every time you hesitate to move forward, you're not just delaying progress, you're dishonoring your assignment. Yes, it's that serious. Because the battle over your life has never been about your comfort, it's always been about your calling. The enemy never feared your weakness. He feared the day you'd wake up and realize how dangerous your clarity is. And now, that day is here. That realization is rising. You can't go back. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unknow what's been revealed to you in the dark. And now that you've tasted a higher frequency, you'll never be able to survive in low spaces again. It's time to let go of the old identity, the one who needed validation, who tolerated crumbs, who questioned their own intuition just to maintain someone else's comfort. That version of you died in the fire, the version that emerged, bulletproof in spirit. No more apologies for who you've become. No more second-guessing the decisions that were born from discernment. No more over-explaining your boundaries, your vision, your pace, or your purpose. You are not too late. You are not too broken. You are not too different. You are exactly who you need to be for what's next. So let this be the final moment you apologize for your power. Let this be the last time you delay your obedience waiting for permission from people who never saw you clearly. Let this be the line you draw in the sand, the moment you stop asking, "Am I enough?" and start declaring, "I was chosen for this," because you were, you are, and now heaven is watching to see what you do with what you've survived. So walk like your prayers are already answered. Speak like your words shake atmospheres. Move like the angels are clearing the path ahead of you, because they are. This is your confirmation, your activation, your command. You're not allowed to doubt anymore. You know too much. You've seen too much. And heaven has invested too much in you to let you waste another second questioning what's already yours. Go, lead, shake the world, not someday, now.